these two parties come a distant second and third, with Labour in third, to the Greens. So, when Labour said that they have the data, and they know, that it is a two-horse race between Labour and Reform, either they are lying or they are completely wrong. Well, one of these two things has to be true. And if they were lying, that is the less embarrassing outcome here. And I'll tell you why. Okay, so as I've already showed you the odds for the next election, right? And the Labour and Reform are still the two favourites for the next election, as I've shown you earlier on. And Labour, unless they move on the economy and wealth taxes, which unfortunately it looks like they still won't, the economy will get worse and their popularity will fall. Now, let's talk a little bit about political two-horse races in which one of the parties is the right or the far right party. So Reform are the new far right party in the UK. I know some people don't like when I use that term, but we have to understand, in an international context, every single country has seen a loss of support in the centre-right party, which in this country is the Conservatives, in the US is the Republicans. The centre-right party has become unpopular and has been replaced by a further right party that is, insurgent. And in the vast majority of countries, including the UK, that far-right party is growing in popularity, but is still unpopular with the majority of the public. So the best example of this is to look at the French political system. So in the French presidential election, there are 2 rounds of voting. And in the first round, we figure out who's first and second, and then we have a head-to-head between first and second. And the way that has been going for a number of years now in France is pretty much always first and second in the first round is the far-right leader and some boring political centrist. Now, as I've explained at the beginning of this video, political centrism is becoming less and less popular around the world, but whilst the far right is growing in popularity, it remains unpopular with the majority of the public. And at the moment, it is still true in most countries that if you can boil the political race down to a far right or a boring centrist, in most cases, at least France has shown for some time, the boring centrist will usually win. Obviously, that is challenged by the last US election. So I think as the far right grows, this is no longer increasingly true. But it is true that if you can simplify an election down as a boring centrist to, yes, we know we're a boring centrist and we're unpopular, but at least we're not the far right, that is a relatively popular and relatively successful electoral strategy. It worked for Biden, it's worked in France for a number of years. And this is the reason why Labour chose to frame this by-election in this way. They know that if they can say, yes, we know we're unpopular, but we're not the far right, they know that that is a relatively successful political strategy. And that's why they chose to frame the Gorton and Denton by-election in this way. The reason that I am head in hands about why they chose to do this at the by-election is that by-election is one seat. It doesn't really change the world, okay? In the next general election, the only good political strategy that Labour are going to have is to say that this election is a two-horse race between us and the far right. If they use that in the next election, they could possibly win. That is their best strategy. It is their best strategy. Now, going into the Gorton and Denton by-election, the Greens were always clear favourites in the betting market for that by-election. But the general election was still looking like a two-horse race between Labour and Reform. So you go into the election, the by-election, and the situation is, yes, we know we're probably going to lose this by-election, which is one seat. But in the next general election, which matters, it is still true that it is most likely a two-horse race between us and Reform. And then you go out in the by-election and you say, when it is always incredibly likely to be immediately proven to be a lie, that this is a two-horse race between us and Reform. And then that is immediately proved to be a lie 2 days later. And then in the next election, your best plan that you have, when you know it's your best plan, is going to say that this general election is a two-horse race between us and Reform. And now, even though it was true, and perhaps still will be true, nobody is going to believe you.